Welcome to another episode of Weekly Art Tips. I'm your host Ando, and today we're going to be looking at Mythala. So let's dive right in. First image we're going to be talking about is Rune Lord, and the first thing we're going to kind of address is just the background, because this is the only image of the two that has a background. And it's a really nice framing device. I like how you don't have the character just completely in this square, and how parts of the pose kind of jump out of the frame, so that's really cool. I also like that you have kind of like a rune texture in the background, not even a texture, but like a pattern of runes. It really adds to the image a lot. Definitely a nice touch. So now that that is moved aside, we're going to be talking specifically about character design in this review. So let's take a look at this pose. I really like how dynamic it is. It's got a lot of movement to it, especially with this scarf kind of blowing in the wind and the hair. That's really awesome. I like how dynamic the look back towards the end of the staff is. That's really cool. It reminds me of a video on dynamic posing that I saw very recently that I thought was really cool, where it talks about how to add a lot more dynamic posing to your characters, is to kind of have them looking the opposite direction of where their body is facing. So like the head would be facing this way, and then the body would be facing that way. So that's a really, really nice like implementation of that kind of posing technique, so that's awesome. And also, I like the fact that you are working with foreshortening here, which foreshortening is kind of a nightmare to learn. It is one of the most difficult things that I find, just kind of working off the top of your head, because it's kind of weird imagining exactly where the limbs go, especially if you don't have somebody doing the pose in front of you or some sort of photo reference. So I do applaud you for working with foreshortening in this image. That being said, I feel like the anatomy is a little off in the arms. It's kind of odd that the shoulder would be moving forward here, and yet the arm would be going back. It would actually probably end up being that the shoulder is like this, and then the arm is going back in space like that. And then this other arm would end up being more like that. But again, this is without a reference photo, so it would definitely not be 100% correct in my little doodle that I just did right now. So I would recommend taking a photograph of somebody doing the same pose, which would probably be the easiest way. You could also check out, just Google images, and find just a whole slew of images of people kind of doing similar poses and kind of connecting the dots to make your own pose. But like I said before, I really applaud you for working with foreshortening, so that's awesome. Also, this leg here seems like it's also foreshortened, where it looks like the knees kind of going up and out, which if that's the case, then this foot would end up being a little bit further down. If it's supposed to be that the character is kneeling but you're seeing it from an angle, then that would end up being correct, but you'd probably end up seeing a bit more of the underside of the foot than the side of the foot. But either way, that would just be a way to kind of improve on the leg positioning. This leg, the side of the pant leg is a little bit wide compared to this part of the leg, so I feel like either building up the leg on this side or kind of skinning that down would improve just the shape of the leg, personally. I'm not 100% bothered by that, though. It is very stylistic to this character. One thing that I would think would be really cool to add to how dynamic this pose is you have this really cool sweeping effect with the hair and the scarf kind of going off to the side, so it looks like it's very windy. Probably wind being added by like maybe some sort of, I don't know, wind turbulence from this staff. But it would be kind of cool to see that brought into the clothing from this area, because you can see it's very windy up on the top, but on the bottom you don't quite see as much wind blowing in the shirt. It looks a lot more fitted. So I thought it's not really a deal breaker. Like I said before, this is more of a nitpick or just something that I personally would add. Would just be kind of having the clothing billow out just a little bit. It wouldn't be that much with the pants because pants normally fit much closer to the body, but just with the shirt, it'd be kind of interesting to see it blowing out a little bit more to kind of match this part of the image. One thing I want to say about this hand right here is that that's a really, really nice pose for the hand. It's very natural looking. It looks like you probably used a reference to see exactly how you would end up holding kind of a staff in this kind of diagonal angle. So that is really awesome. I like that. Just a slight thing that is a bit of an issue is that this finger is a little bit too skinny, but if you just build that up a little bit, that's a really, really solid hand, and I like it. This hand is a little bit smaller. It does look like it's moving back in space, but with the way that the staff is located, I feel like the staff would kind of be receding a bit more if it's supposed to be very, very far back in space to kind of match how small the hand is in comparison to this hand. So either change the angle of the staff or just make the hand just a slight tad bit bigger. Other than that, the expression is really nice. I like this expression. It's kind of like a, I don't know, it's a very intriguing expression. I'm trying to figure out what this character is thinking. I think it's really cool. It's got a good amount of determination, as well as a bit of knowledge, like this character is doing something that they've done 1,000 times, and they know exactly what they're doing. They're just very focused on what they're working with, so that's really awesome. The design for the staff is really cool. I like that a lot. It's especially just kind of like the way that this mystical gem is kind of floating in it. That's really cool. I like that. It's a very interesting design for the character. And I also have a soft spot for characters with white hair. So I really like the hair design as well. So I think this is a very, very neat image. And one other thing I want to mention about the character design is I like the nose, because I am a definite, like, I don't know, I want to say that I kind of abuse little button noses, and I know a lot of people are much more in tune with like button noses or those kind of anime noses where they're like little shadow triangles. But I always like it when characters have kind of interesting shaped noses, and so you have this really cool kind of like flat nose or like a beaky looking nose, so that's really, really neat. I like the design of the nose for this character. That is a great touch. One thing I want to mention about color is you have color down pretty good. I like how harmonious the colors work. You kind of have like 2 highlight tones in all of these highlights going across the back. Like the coloring on the scarf is just my favorite part. Just all of the coloring that you used on the scarf is just perfect in my opinion. This is probably my favorite part of the scarf, is just the way that this highlighting works and then this kind of shading. So I'm really a fan of your color usage and just how, I don't know, it's like it's cell shading almost, but it's also a lot more painterly than that. So I really enjoy that. It's a cool design for your coloring and shading. One thing that I also like is that you have a specific light source, so you can tell that the light is coming from this direction. So that's really cool, and I am assuming that the light is coming from this gemstone over here. If it is coming from here, then maybe kind of upping how much highlighting is on the staff would really help kind of pull that together, because if not, it looks just like you have like a sun or a light bulb or something coming from this direction. So if you want to make it look like the lighting is more centered off of this gemstone, adding like chunkier highlights to the staff, and then even lowering the black opacity of this line around the gem would really add like a lot more of a light source from it. If not, and it's just supposed to be that light is generally coming from this direction, stick with that. And then I think the last thing I'm going to mention about this image is that the coloring with the skin seems to be a little muddy in comparison to the rest of your coloring, just because the shading that you're using is kind of a gray. I think that maybe if you make it a bit more of a warm color, it would look a lot more lifelike. Because when it comes to skin, there's a lot of redness and kind of browns and yellow tones, more than there are gray tones to your skin. When you make skin tones too dark or too gray, it takes a lot of life out of your characters. But the way that you have the hands here, there seems to be a little bit more redness to them, so the hands look like they have a lot more life than the face does. So even if it's just adding a layer with like a slight red tint above it and just lowering the opacity to like almost nothing, that would add a lot more life to the character. But that's more of a nitpick for me personally. I think that the image is really solid, and personally I think that this is a fantastic start. I love it. The pose, like I said, is very dynamic, so I like looking at it. It's really cool. And let's move on to the next image. So the next image is Master Aim. So I want to say that this is a very ambitious pose. I like the posing like idea. I like the kind of dynamic like leaping in midair. That's really cool. One thing I will say about the foreshortening is that, again, it's not 100% anatomically correct. I would recommend looking at a couple of photo references to kind of get that a bit better. But like I said, it is really difficult to get foreshortening correct. You need to do a lot of practice to kind of really understand exactly how it works without using a photo reference, and I am not even at that level. I use photo references all the freaking time. So, like I said, foreshortening is terrible to learn. So, but you have a really solid start. Both of these images use foreshortening, so that's really cool that you're kind of expanding into that sort of posing, and this is also a very dynamic image as well. So, pretty much my main suggestions for the foreshortening in these arms would be to kind of track exactly where the joints would be. So say that this would be like the shoulder and the forearm. You would kind of connect the other part, like your elbow over here, and then the hand would probably end up being more like this. But you seem to have more foreshortening here than what I'm working on, so yeah, like I said, I'd need a photo reference to 100% get the correct just amount of foreshortening, but even without a photograph, when you kind of look at exactly what kind of pose you're working for, you might be surprised. You're like, oh wow, you'd see that part of the arm over here? That doesn't make any sense. But just kind of looking for that type of like pose in Google Images, or just having a friend pose for you and you could take a photograph, would really help a lot with just the way that you do your foreshortening. This arm seems to be a little bit closer. The hand seems to be pretty spot on for just how it would be posed with the bow and arrow. But the arm seems to be a little bit too high up. I feel like since your shoulder would end up being over here, the arm would end up being more like that. Yeah, more like that. So, like I said, that's very rough. I'd need a photo as well. But just kind of a couple of tweaks would really help that posing with the arms a lot more. The way that the head is a little bit too far back on the shoulder, in my opinion. I feel like it would be scooted a little bit more that direction, just because if this was the pose, the neck would be here, and then the head would be really, really far back. If the character is kind of looking like this direction, then the neck would end up being more like this, and then so yeah, like that. And maybe adding a bit more of a curve to the spine would add a bit more of a dynamic pose to this, but honestly, that's not really bothering me that much. It looks like your character is kind of doing like a falling leap where they're trying to keep their torso straight so it can get like a better shot. So that's not really too much of an issue. I just feel like the issues with the arms are kind of messing with the perspective just a little bit on how the character is posing. Yeah, like I said, I would use a couple of photo references just to kind of get a better idea of exactly where the limbs should be located. The way that the legs are, however, seem to be really spot on. I like that. This is a really well done foot. I like the posing and just the dimensions of this foot. That's really nice. I feel like this foot, however, is a little less formed than this foot. Kind of have like a bit of a slope to the way that the foot is, where you don't have this kind of ball to the foot like you have on this one. So I feel like kind of even if it's like the toes are kind of curling back, it would look a little bit more rectangular on the bottom than this more spherical foot design. But like I said, this foot is a really good model to just kind of base your other foot off of. The way that the scarf is also, again, very nice and dynamic. I feel like the other scarf was a bit more correct in just the way that it would be flying back, just because right here it looks like it's not quite connected, so I feel like if you kind of continue more of an S-curve here, that would work, but that's more of a nitpick than anything. I personally really like your coloring choices that you used in this as well, so especially just with the fact that you used mostly purples, and then you have these really, really bright reds, so it's really cool. You can kind of zone exactly into the important part of the image, which is this kind of flaming looking arrow right in the middle. So that's really cool. Definitely helps locate exactly where the point of interest in this image is for you to look at, and then the way that the scarf kind of blows moves you back into the pose. So that's really cool. I like the composition of this pose. I also like how floofy the hair is. Is that a word? Floofy? Okay, that's now a word. Floofy. I like how floofy the hair is. And I am a sucker for characters with goggles. So that's pretty cool. I like that as a character design aspect. I really do like this character design. It's very neat. It reminds me of kind of like a thief character. So I think that is super cool. I like the kind of attitude that this character has. And again, I like your nose. Instead of it just being like a normal button, it's kind of like pointier. So that's really cool. And I also kind of like how you have this little heart-shaped mouth. That's adorable. Other than that, I don't really have very many other suggestions for this. Like I said, I like the color palette. I like the dynamicness of this pose. Basically, my main suggestions are to look at a couple more anatomy photos, just to kind of get a real feel for exactly how this pose would end up looking. But really, this is a very solid start, and both of your pieces were really adorable, and I loved looking at them. So thank you so much for sending work in. And that is it for this week. See y'all soon. Bye-bye.